as to the underlying motivations, what function? What purpose? Why? These appear not to be cared about. Only how is a matter of concern, and even there, such answers as may be presented are irrelevant, or at best non sequiturs. If this is all, there is a great void, a great emptiness.
Author and columnist Ben Shapiro, the editor-at-large of Breitbart.com, will talk about Hollywood's influence on how Americans think, the types of personalities voters want in a U.S. president, and what he says is the left's tendency to intimidate political opponents. Mr. Shapiro is the author of 5 books, including Primetime Propaganda, and his 2013 release, Bullies.
Shapiro, from your newest book, Bullies, you write, President Obama was elected at least in part because he was black. It was a positive for him. Many Americans believed that America needed to elect its first black president to move beyond issues of race once and for all. Instead, they got a champion race bully masquerading as a racial unifier. What do you mean?
What I mean by that is that President Obama came into office on this great wave of American approval, this idea that he was going to unify the country along racial lines. Instead, what's happened is that the president has really suggested in multiple ways not only the continuation of American racism, but that is one of the most serious problems still facing the country. We've seen it in everything, manifest in everything from the George Zimmerman trial to the continued focus on voter ID, the attempt by the Obama administration to paint voter ID as a racist thing as opposed to an attempt to quash voter fraud. The questioning the motivations of the American people, or at least his opponents, is something that President Obama likes to do on a pretty frequent basis, and it pays tremendous dividends. And the only sector of the racial population that showed up in larger numbers than the previous election cycle in 2012 was the black community. They showed up in numbers far outweighing their proportion in the population, which is great. I mean, it's wonderful they showed up. Unfortunately, a lot of folks showed up because they were convinced that by voting for President Obama, they were stopping a great racist tide that had kind of swum up to the surface against President Obama, as opposed to just people who opposed him politically.
So when you hear the term post-racial, what does that mean to you?
Well, post-racial means to me the idea that, you know, we live in a country where everybody is free to make their own way, and that the obstacles that folks face should be identified and targeted on an individual level. I think that we get into ghost hunting pretty quickly when we start talking about institutional racism. And the idea that there is this vast racist conspiracy to keep people down. I don't think that's true in America anymore. It's certainly not true for people of my generation. And the continued push that we saw, for example, at the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, this continued idea that the greatest obstacle facing young black folks is white racism. Not only is it not true, it's tremendously damaging for both white folks and black folks.
In Bullies, you have a subchapter, Anatomy of a Racial Bullying, the Smear Campaign, March 8th, 2012.
Well, I mean, what I was talking about when I talked about the racial bullying there was the racial bullying of the Trayvon Martin case. That case really turned pretty quickly into an attempt by the left to paint George Zimmerman as a white guy who had tracked down and murdered a black kid, as opposed to what actually happened, a half-white guy who was really Hispanic. It's the first time in human history anybody had ever said that someone was a white Hispanic. It's like saying that President Obama is a white black. But George Zimmerman was a Hispanic guy, and he, under disputed circumstances, shot Trayvon Martin after presumably having, and a jury ruled, had his head hit against the ground several times by Trayvon Martin. And that turned into a clear-cut Emmett Till attempt to murder a black person by a white person. And that is not what happened at all. Not only is it not what happened, it's something that the left likes to do on a pretty regular basis, which is to take controversial situations and turn them into a great referendum on the race question in America, whether you're talking about O.J. Simpson or whether you're talking about Rodney King or whether you're talking about something that wasn't even infused with race, like the George Zimmerman case. The FBI has been searching for evidence that George Zimmerman is a racist for months now, and they've been unable to find anything. So George Zimmerman was picked out and he was targeted, and that race was turned into a race case as opposed to what it really was, which was a tragic circumstance for both folks, obviously more tragic for Trayvon Martin because he ended up dead.
You highlight the Associated Press, saying that they wrote a story that seemed racial in nature. Is the media part of this bullying?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the media are the chief bullies in American political life, at least the media that portray themselves as objective. I really don't have as much of a problem with media folks who don't portray themselves as objective. That's what they do, and at least they're honest about it. But there are a lot of folks in the media who say that they're objective and then use that objectivity as a baton to wield against others. So, for example, CNN tried to make it out that George Zimmerman had actually used a racial slur in his 911 call. That was not true. NBC famously edited the 911 call of George Zimmerman to make it sound like he was a racist, saying that George Zimmerman, he had tracked Trayvon Martin down, then said he was black without being prompted by the 911 operator, which was not true. The AP originally reported that George Zimmerman was white when in fact he was Hispanic. All of that was geared toward building up a racial controversy because that sells newspapers, and racial controversy also pushes forward a certain political line. If there is a tremendous amount of institutional racism that still pervades all areas of American life, then historically the way that that's been rooted out is by government interventionism. So if that continues to be the case, if America continues to be a deeply racist country, then what that really is a call for more federal and state and local government intervention into the lives of Americans to try and root out that racism.
Back to bullies. Feminists want to paper over differences between men and women in favor of a bizarre sort of gender androgyny. If there are real differences between the sexes, then women might need men and men might need women, and that would destroy any semblance of pure equality.
Well, equality, according to many women on the left, or many of the feminist left, it means to feminists sameness, as opposed to equality. I believe that women should have the ability to get a job the same as men should. My mom is not only a working woman; she does business affairs on reality TV shows like Hell's Kitchen. She heads up companies. My wife is at UCLA Medical School. I'm a big believer in women in the workplace. What I'm not a believer in is ignoring the reality of the situation, which is that men and women are not only different in terms of genitalia, but are different in terms of how they think. And every study that's ever been done, scientific study, has shown that men and women, their brains do not operate in exactly the same way. That's a beautiful thing. Diversity is a great thing. But attempting to pretend that men and women are identical, especially with regard to how the sexes relate with one another, is a mistake.
Ben Shapiro, who are some of these other bullies that you refer to?
Well, in bullies, I break it down really by topic. I mean, there are race bullies, there are sex bullies, there are environmentalist bullies, there are anti-Israel bullies. There are all sorts of bullies in the American life. And what I really mean by bullies is not just folks who disagree with you politically. What I mean by bullies is folks who say that you are morally inferior if you disagree with them politically. And this is something that the left seems to like to do with a fair bit of frequency. It's not that they disagree with you on the topic. It's that the left, many on the left anyway, think that you're a bad person if you disagree with them. If you disagree with them, it's not because you can have honest differences of opinion. It's not because you can bring evidence to marshal for your argument. It's because you're just a nasty cuss. This is what I said to Piers Morgan on the gun control issue, because this is essentially the argument that he was making. He said, here's why I support, the reason I support gun control is because if you don't support gun control, you don't care about dead kids in Sandy Hook. And so what I said to Piers Morgan, and I meant it, was that it's a nasty thing to stand on the graves of folks and then claim moral superiority. I think that most Americans actually want the same thing. I think that we all want a better life. I think we want a better life for our children, a safer life, a more moral life. I think we all want a spiritually higher life. We all want a lot of the same things. Proclaiming that folks on the other side don't want those things and are actually nasty deep down in the core of them just because they disagree with you is a way to silence the debate. And unfortunately, it seems like one side of the political aisle has really kind of taken a monopoly on that.
And you write, we've spent decades being cowed by the jackboots of the politically correct, the race baiters, class warriors, secularist, and scaremongering thugs. We have bowed to their whims. We've tried to be polite, they've spit in our faces, then blamed us for debasing the level of our national discourse. They've tried to minimize the number of voices in the political arena, and we've gone along with it because we pine for a time when Americans can all share their hopes and dreams together rather than quarreling over what separates us. We want e pluribus unum, from many one. They want the opposite, from one many.
Well, diversity to many folks who are on the left does not mean that we can all share the same goals and aspirations and yet still have different cultures and bring all of those cultures to bear. What it means for many on the left is that if you don't think like me, then you are intolerant and undiverse. And these buzzwords have been used to castigate folks and silence folks and make people feel as though they are morally inferior for taking a certain political position. And that should be unacceptable in the American discourse. And unfortunately, as a response, the only response is to get down in the mud. I mean, politically speaking, this is why, if you had to sum up why Mitt Romney lost the 2012 election, look at how Mitt Romney portrayed Barack Obama and look at how Barack Obama portrayed Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney portrayed Barack Obama as a not competent president. He was not good at his job. He was somebody who didn't know what to do on the economy. He was a neophyte on foreign policy. He really didn't know what he was doing as a general matter, but he was a good family man. He was a good guy. He was somebody who you'd want to go out to a beer with. Romney would actually say this. He'd say, you know, President Obama is a good man. I just think that he's not very good at being president. If you look at how the left campaigned against Mitt Romney, however, including people in the Obama campaign, Mitt Romney was a guy who put dogs on the top of his car. Mitt Romney was a guy who had binders full of women because he hated women. He was somebody who wanted to put you all back in chains. Mitt Romney was the sort of guy who specifically fired employees so that later, 5 years later, their wives would die of cancer because they didn't have health insurance. Mitt Romney was the guy who stashed all of his money in offshore bank accounts while singing a ghostly version of America the Beautiful because he didn't like America. This is who Mitt Romney was, and the polls showed this. Right? In the exit polling, most Americans actually agreed with Mitt Romney on a lot of issues. There's one issue on which they disagreed with Mitt Romney. When it came to the exit polling that said, which candidate do you think cares more about people like you, Mitt Romney got blown away, like 80-20. I think the poll is 81-19. People, including that would include probably certainly a plurality of Republicans, thought that Barack Obama cared more about people like them than Mitt Romney did. That's not because Barack Obama is world's nicest, warmest figure. That's because if you spend years castigating somebody as the world's meanest figure, and you have a choice between incompetent president and second to Mussolini, you're generally going to choose incompetent president.
Ben Shapiro, Bullies is your 5th book. How old were you when you wrote your first book, Brainwashed?
I wrote it junior year of college. I'd been 19.
How did you come up with the idea of writing that book?